Hello. I want to share with you about my book, The Wolf in a Suit. So I thought I would read a little bit from it. Part one is my story, and part two is me speaking as a psychotherapist, and I retell um, 10 fairy tales where I reinterpret them. So the original tales are in here, and then I reinterpret them, and I bring in new information to about families, about relationships, about love, about stress, trauma, culture. So let's begin. I'll just open it up. So I'm going to read from the introduction, and it says, "Who is telling tales?" And I started off writing this book to do with Little Red Riding Hood, but I'll share more about that either today or another day. Just getting my computer ready. Different things are popping up. Okay. So I remember when my lawyer asked me to write out everything that had happened while it was still fresh in my mind. I could feel shame and stupidity running through me as I sat alone with the whole catastrophe. No one was able to bear the whole, including me, and the whole lay gaping within me. I would sit at my sister's computer as I did not possess my own. Day after day I'd play catch up and type years of memories, sobbing silently at the painful memories so I did not disturb my children in the next room, sobbing in despair over how the words were so inadequate in portraying the depth of what had happened. How could I translate being frozen in fear? The unpredictable and violent actions, those icy cruel looks that made me flinch mid-motion, those cold words thrown like knives, the heavy, thick fear coating every particle of air and every cell in my being. He was a walking reminder of all the threats and punishment that had been and were yet to come. My isolation, pinned against the wall, dragged on the ground. How would anyone understand what got me here? How could I? After all, aren't we all taught right from wrong as a child? Knowing right from wrong and ending up in abuse is a big gap. At times, don't we all fall into gaps? Gaps from overwhelm, or we don't want to upset someone. Gaps because we don't know how to be with uncomfortable feelings, difficult experiences, and helplessness. We've lost touch with the art of living. We're superimposed with elite ideas and bombarded with technology and marketing. We don't want to feel out of control and reveal the mess that we don't know what to do. We don't want anyone to fall to pieces. We don't want to reject anyone or be rejected, shamed or ridiculed. We don't want to be wrong or weak. So we leave gaps in our sentences, deleting important details, gaps in our feelings, leaving out certain feelings and information, gaps in our actions invisibly interrupted by discomfort from taking the right action. Some important pieces in the puzzle are left to slide underground, maybe more often than is helpful in our relationships and in our sense of self, connections, and choices. Misunderstandings, misperceptions, miscommunication, and confusion creep in. There are two faces of confusion. There is destructive confusion, which arises from trauma and overwhelm. It inhibits us and keeps us in limbo. There's also healthy confusion, which allows us to pause, reflect, notice more, and ask questions. It enables us to check and retest our reality to gain a deeper clarity and understanding. If we stay with the certainty that what we know is the absolute all, then there is no confusion. But there is also no growth. Confusion becomes necessary to allow us to question and become curious. Confusion creates the spaces for change and curiosity. Curiosity allows new information to come in. If we stay with the old way of perceiving or engaging with our experiences, we remain unquestioning of the old. There is no crack or pathway for the new to come into our awareness. We are fixed in our orientation. Confusion creates cracks which let some light in. I imagine you can think of instances where you were convinced you knew the whole truth, and then sometime later realize that there's more to it than you realized. Pause now for a moment and think of an instance in your life that was without question, but later your perception or understanding changed. Perhaps a time when hindsight brought new information to an old awareness. It could be about a person you met, or that saturated fats are bad for you. We need confusion to destabilize the old way and allow uncertainty to open up space for questions and new possibilities to arise. We also need emotional muscle to allow questions and curiosity about this confusion. I think there's too much destructive confusion and overwhelm in our society, too many fixed black and white views, too much reductionist thinking, too much of an attempt to stay in control through blame or power, too much control over life and death, such as keeping people alive when their body would die if left alone. I'm not talking about leaving people in pain. Such as, that bit was in brackets, so I'm just going to go over so the sentence makes more sense. Such as keeping people alive when their body would be left. You know what? I haven't read my book since I read it over and over and over again with doing the editing. Oh, hi, Jassy. Great to see you on here. So it's interesting. I can see that there's parts of me that would like to do another edition and just tweak some of the wording. So it's like, there's too much narrow answers which bring narrow solutions and are not lasting. This narrow blinkered focus to find the quick and magic solution, dissecting details down to find the gene, the chemical, or the answer in an effort to save the whole, which loses the bigger context, information, and meaning. We need healthy confusion to identify and clear the rubbish out of the way. We need to develop emotional muscle to match our intellectual muscle so we can open up to the whole and bear the confusion. Emotional muscle to open up to vulnerability, shame, and the unknown, and ownership of our reality and our experience. We need to know that our heart can bear our wounds. For this reality check to take place, we need effective internal resources and support, such as external resources and support. A social tribe and community that sees and provides both space and ways of being with the whole of our experience. We need ritual and honor for what we go through. When we go through a horrific experience, we need rituals to contain it and provide a structure to process the event. Rituals such as what we have for death are also needed for episodes of our life. Our pain needs to be shared in our community space through rituals. We need to not be alone. Together we can be with the largeness of life. People are afraid to be with the whole of our experience. People deny the feeling of what is happening for a range of reasons. Traumatic response, shame, lack of skills or support, fear of rejection and isolation, emotional pain. And we need to do something about this urgently. We come face to face with people every day who are denying what is happening with their feelings or life in general. We can see evidence of this with the epidemic of anxiety, depression, addictions of all sorts, disconnection from a full landscape of feelings and emotions, and of course in domestic violence. Don't we teach people to own their mistakes? Don't we teach children to own their mistakes? bear the consequences, and develop emotional muscle to face what they've done. We do this so they learn, grow, and mature. We don't want children to blame and deny. Don't we do this because we want our children to become decent adults and develop consciousness and responsibility? Are we walking the talk and modeling what we ask of children? Have we turned into the kind of adults we don't want to be? Are we acting as if things are okay, offloading the blame and shame? Are we big enough to face the music and create a community that we're proud of? I believe we're at a crossroad. Either our society becomes divided with adults and organisations that are big bullies and want someone else to take the blame and maintain a distorted reality, or we become mature adults grounded in the whole with creative and constructive skills and resources. We need a map based on solid theory, which contains processes and heals. Some pockets of society have knowledge of this map. We need emotional muscle to experiment and try new things out of our comfort zone so this new map can spread. We need the capacity to metabolize our unthinkable thoughts, unbearable feelings, toxic shame, and incorrect actions. We do currently have the potential to support and change individual, family, social, and legal systems. This is happening in pockets around communities, but we need global change to benefit as a whole. This book is here to help bridge between the old and the new, to create mindful, creative confusion and conversations about abuse in the family and relationships, to serve the bigger truth, to help stir questions and awareness, to further understandings about this web of silence, secrecy, and shame which modern society has continued to weave from our history into the new day. We need to look at the foundations of society, people, and power. After all, when we strip back into the context of family violence in relationships and violence in all other settings, it is all about individual power being taken over by a select few. This has been going on for so long that disconnection has become normal. These cracks and gaps mean we all speak with deletions and split from the whole story. It's a social and cultural norm. We speak of our ideal as if we live it, but we don't. We speak about the ideal as if we have a right to have the ideal. That life is being unfair and unjust when life is, in reality, the full catastrophe, light and darkness. We want life to be like a fairy tale, but it isn't. Life isn't the fairy tale dream. In my life, I've had to work hard to dissolve this idealized longing, wishing pattern within me. It's been tough going. Hopes are so enticing. They are based on ideals that seem so enchanting. The wound of hope and ideals is that they're bound in waiting and longing for what is idealized or desired to be bestowed. Hope leaves us waiting to be taken care of instead of taking ownership of our dreams or reality. What are you hoping and longing for? How are you telling yourself or those around you a fairy tale and ignoring or denying part of what is real? When you've experienced suffering, you automatically long for the opposite. When you experience wrongs, you know how it should be. But in reality, these ideal longings and hopes often become bewitching and are actually destructive if we hold to their perfection, leading us to righteousness and over entitlement instead of them being a beacon to take action. The ideals and hopes are not based on the reality that we face, the imperfection of humanity, and they do not help us metabolize these imperfections, but rather feed a desire to escape from our reality. These kinds of dreams are not in context with the reality of life, nor are they constructive wishes. They're not dreams that have seeds in reality, which have the potential to lead to positive change. Remember, I'm not speaking from black and white absolute reductionist thinking that wipes out all hope and wishes. I'm talking about a specific kind of hope and wishes. This orientation of hope and wishes holds deletions and is a mismatch with reality. Ideal hope creates a helplessness, a longing and wishing that prevents you being able to fully stand on positive and confident ground and going for what you can develop. This mismatch leaves us vulnerable prey for people who have fixed ideals or a distorted image of reality. A perfect fit. We can't bear reality, and they offer us a reality, albeit a fantasy reality, where we can be taken care of. Little Red Riding Hood and the Wolf. Even the actions of the mother and the absent father in the story collude with this ideal fantasy reality. All you need to know about is to be kind, and there's nothing that will get you. A fairy tale, yet we can see the gaps that are not filled, and how Little Red Riding Hood falls in the gaps, unable to navigate the real world. I want a world where we can engage with ourselves and others in creative fullness. I want the world to be a better place than what I was born into. I want you to live and breathe emotional courage and resiliency, to be with the whole. Let's face it, life is not a fairy tale or the Garden of Eden. Even the Garden of Eden could not last and had its light and dark. Life is made up of good and bad, night and day, joy and sorrow, winter and summer, life and death, the full cycle. Yet there is a place for fairy tales. What? Aren't I contradicting what I just said? Let's think about the fairy tales we read as children. They're not idealized wishes and hopes. They all have wonder and horror, good and bad. These stories serve a purpose and embody real life dynamics that we need to wake up to, but we have inadvertently tended to dismiss. Dynamics that are very real in our day to day life. Dynamics about people and life's challenges. The dismissal of these real life dynamics is a bit like when we drive and we become so used to driving that we don't see the streets we pass, or that train tracks that we live beside and how we no longer hear the train every 20 minutes, or how we turn the radio on and we don't even hear it playing. What is in your life that you have tuned out? I'm going to tell you lots of fairy tales in The Wolf in a Suit. We will begin with Little Red Riding Hood, which will be familiar to you in some kind of way, but perhaps not in the way I retell it. I will tell you some fairy tales that may not be as familiar to you, but they each shed more light on meaningful connections and inner dynamics and shadows that are often present in relationships. After all, each and every relationship has dynamics that are also familiar to abusive relationships. All relationships involve the self and the other, along with some challenges around control, stress, conflict, love, anger, boundaries, power, and even hate. All these dynamics affect relationships, and all relationships affect our inner self as well as our outer lives. So the information and stories I tell are valuable to anyone who's in any kind of relationship, either with yourself, a partner, someone in your family, even a boss in your workplace. And I'd add, whether you're in a relationship or not, a valuable way of reflecting to past relationships as well and future potential relationships. Given this book is about abuse, a very heavy, sad, and horrific topic, I find fairy tales allows us to look within through a soulful lens. They allow us to go beyond the external facts, the broken bones, and the wounded sense of self. Don't get me wrong, the facts are important, and we talk about this in depth in part 2 of The Wolf in a Suit. But I want to focus on facts that are not as commonly connected to or understood in the context of abuse. Fairy tales allow us the opportunity to become witness to dynamics. There is less need to defend these dynamics when the story is not about us. Hearing a story allows us to receive information, clarity, and insight about a dynamic. From here, we can become curious, experimenting and reflecting on our own experience and truth. We can take in the dynamic in a non-threatening way. Fairy tales can remind us that we are more than a survivor or a perpetrator. We are part of a family, a society, a history that has played a part in shaping us and contributed to who we are. Fairy tales can reassure us that we are not alone and remind us that these things are not just happening now, as these stories are old and retell tales of what we as humans keep struggling with. Let's awaken to our real life and not just that of our advanced technological mind. We are more than the society's mode of being a thinking machine. We have depth and layers, a conscious and an unconscious, a mind and a body, an inner and an outer. We are more than the evolved society or the individuated person. We are an individual within a society. Isn't it time we be with the whole, where the individual can, in their wholeness, be accepted in society, and society can include and value the individual? We have evolved enough that the tribe does not need to kill off the individual who is different from the rest of the tribe. I want to bring the unconscious and the body into the conversation of abuse. Our current conversation is disembodied, disemboweled. The solution reminds us to be with the body and the whole, the mind and the body, the conscious and the unconscious, the inner and the outer. After all, science tells us that it's not the conscious brain that determines our decisions and impulses. We've been focusing on the conscious as that can feel comfortable, contained, and knowable, but the answers are in the darkness of the unconscious impulses and the body. Factual words cannot capture the fullness of what has happened. I remember the despair when I wrote in my diary what was happening in the relationship and in the many years following going through court to protect my children. I was writing facts, but facts don't paint the full picture. The courts didn't want the full picture, but the facts don't give you the smell in the air. Isn't the full picture inclusive of the atmosphere? Doesn't the atmosphere shape our behaviours and choices? Whether we're in an old school room, the library, the theatre, or the football stadium, each place has an atmosphere. This atmosphere is created from the people and their actions. Each teacher in each classroom is different and has their own influence, even if they're all doing the same thing in each classroom. If we just describe the seat arrangement and the event, but not the wave of effect from and between the people, there is a huge chunk missing. Fairy tales can help us connect to our soulful and magical depth, the subtle layers that are not necessarily fully grasped or made real through everyday words. We just speak of the outer world and its facts. Our language is peppered with metaphors and symbology to describe the atmosphere of experience of life beyond the rational word, the abyss, being quiet as a mouse, a heart of stone. Life is a roller coaster. Love is a battlefield, the elephant in the room, the sacred cow. So many metaphors and symbology. We need a language which describes a greater, fuller fullness of the experience. Metaphors and symbology describe this and need to be valued as providing real and true meaning. By losing access to the language of our unconscious and our dreaming night self, we can easily become lost in the fast external pace and stressful survival elements of life and lose our soul. We can lose solace and become depressed. Let us be part of the age of awakening to the real full life. Life and fairy tales are about this and that. Life is full of opposites. Life is not about this or that. The mode of this and that is the feminine quality. It is inclusive and attends to the full big picture. This or that is a more masculine attribute, black and white, discerning about details. I'm not implying that feminine equals good and masculine equals bad, not at all. We all have feminine and masculine qualities and attributes within each of us, regardless of our gender. The feminine and masculine within each of us needs the other, as each expresses part of the whole. The feminine can be said to be about feelings, inclusiveness, the body, the unconscious, symbols, art, relating, connections, music, and being. This is typically spoken of as the right brain. The masculine can be said to be about the mind, conscious thinking, words, numbers, details, sequences, dissecting, compartmentalizing, mathematics, analyzing, and action. This is typically understood to be the left brain. I'd also add that the right brain is also connected to the unknown, because the left brain is to do with the sequential and the past, and the left brain is also to do with separating things. So I speak of the two parts of the whole as feminine and masculine rather than left or right for the following reason. We have become a society which values left brain masculine attributes and devalues the knowledge and power of the right brain, the feminine orientation. Yet when we talk about the brain, we automatically would know that we need a left and right brain to be wholly functioning. We can't just be left brain, can we? We are more comfortable being with the right brain and left brain labeling than for our society to acknowledge, reflect, allow, and know that the whole is only complete when both the feminine and masculine attributes are engaged. Both the feminine and masculine are valuable to access, express, and learn from, and be informed by in each aspect of our life, events, and relationships. Both the feminine and masculine are essential in all contexts of life and are at risk of being polarized and held hostage in relationship with an abuser. We need the feminine and masculine. We need to think about our feelings and feel about our thinking. How can we truly connect to our whole brain, our whole body, our whole experience if we only perceive and understand from one lens? We need both. We need this and that. This is my personal story. That is the context of theories about abuse. This is also fairy tales. We learn and absorb through more than one lens. This book is about many stories in the context of abuse. These stories include fairy tales, the mind and body, the conscious and unconscious, the individual in the family in society, all in an attempt to include the whole of the human psyche and its surroundings. The purpose of my book, The Wolf in a Suit, is to tell the whole story and link the pieces together. Something can only be filed away if all the pieces are together. If you have a folder on your computer, but some of the files for the folder are on the desktop or in a USB drive, then that folder can't be filed away. Not until all the files are in the one folder can there be completion. Let's do some real naming so that we can do some gathering, filing, and resolution. So that's part of the introduction to The Wolf in a Suit, to do with who is telling tales. I'm going to tomorrow read a little bit more from the introduction. And in this part, I talk about men and why I tell some of my family story and not just about the relationship of living in abuse. So I would love it if you want to join me, and I will share more about who is telling tales tomorrow. And I'm just flicking through as to whether I will break up the next part into two more mornings in the introduction. So you'll hear more of the introduction over two more mornings. So I would love your feedback because I haven't read my story aloud before. Would you want me to read slower? Would you want me to pause and add my perspectives from now? Because I wrote The Wolf in a Suit in 2016 and it's now 2022. So I'm writing a book this year that goes beyond this. So I would write it differently now if I was writing it today. So let me know if you want me to read it slower, add more perspectives from now, or just stick purely to this one now and you can get the other book later. And I will break up the introduction into 3 mornings because it's too much to read all in one go. And if you're interested to, when we get into the actual fairy tales, and I'm doing that as a book club. So if you want me to read the fairy tale, the original, and then my interpretation, and each fairy tale will be over maybe 2 weeks where we read it and then we talk about it, and each fairy tale is in the context of different elements of life. So I have got in my book. So when I'm doing the book club, the first section would be on Rumpelstiltskin, and then the Handless Maiden, and then Bluebeard's Seduction, and then Banish Lilith. If you don't know, Lilith was in the Garden of Eden with Adam before Eve. Then the Little Match Girl, then Red Shoes, and finally Vasilisa. So if you want me to read, if you want to join me in reading those fairy tales, then let me know. The only other thing I want to say before we begin is, if I can find the page, and I can't find it. I give a guide to reading. Here it is. So just so you know, Rumpelstiltskin is about naming, and in there we also explore about the types of abuse and the differences between abuse and conflict. If you want to read the Handless Maiden, that's the chapter to do with family, culture, history, and religion. If you want to hear me read Bluebeard Seduction, that's the chapter where we talk about love, false love, and the hooks, and what makes it hard to leave toxic relationships. If you want to hear about Lilith, that's the chapter where we talk about anger, power, assertion, aggression, passivity. If you want to hear about the Little Match Girl, that's the chapter where we talk about the 2 types of hope, the cycle of violence, and why I don't agree with the cycle of violence. And the Red Shoes is the next chapter. If you want to hear about stress, a women's unique stress response, and some other fascinating facts to do with trauma and stress. And I think that's a chapter where I also talk about shame. And if you want to hear about Vasilisa, the Queen, that's the chapter to read about reclaiming your feminine instinct and healing. And there are a few other fairy tales added into some of those chapters. We also do have Cinderella and the Ugly Duckling. In some chapters, you get 2 fairy tales. So let me know if you'd like to hear all of the fairy tales and all of the content relating to the fairy tales, or would you just want to book in for 1 2-week section, and just one, because each chapter is complete of itself. So that's it for today. I hope to see you here tomorrow at 10 a.m. Melbourne time, and I will read a little bit more of Introduction, who is telling tales from The Wolf in a Suit. Thanks for listening and watching.